Good morning. We continue our journey in the conclusion of Ayin Beis. We are on top of page 1428. Essentially initially began discussing, going back to the theme that Yisrael, Neshamas Yisrael, are rooted in the highest place, higher than everything, higher than Torah, and definitely higher than Malachim, angels. And they're called Ishin Einai. Einai, the pupil of his eye, of God's eye. Malachim, on the other hand, are called Einei Hashem, the eyes of God. So the pupil is in the eye itself, plays a unique role, like the crown jewel, if you wish, of the eye. But nevertheless, Malachim do play a role, and that's the Einei Hashem, like we learned, they're the supervisors, the Hashgacha. Because as we've been discussing, the Malachim serve as Shluchei Shefa, like the ministers of a king, who supervise and oversee and distribute and allocate, to the point that we even compared them to the cosmic digestive system that takes the food that the person eats. In this case, Neshamas Yisrael, do the Avodas HaBedurim, takes the food and breaks it down, separating the nutrients from the waste, and the other aspects of the distribution of the nourishment that sustains the body in the human being, and the same thing in the cosmic level that the Malachim achieve, as we learned in the last few pages. Now, this was based on a pasuk, Homu me'ai loy, Homu me'ai loy, Alkein Homu me'ai loy, because the neshamas are my precious child, Ephraim Yakali ben Yakali Ephraim, like he began. So therefore, my guts agitate for him when he's in distress. And those guts he's referring to is exactly that, may the angels. And Rachem Arachmenu, and I have compassion for him. So the Rebbe Rashab, in the process of explaining what the Malachim do, wants to now understand what is the Rachem Arachmenu, the compassion aspect, which is going to broaden the whole topic here, not just to the Malachim, but in general, the entire process of how we connect to godliness. Because at the end of the day, what are the Malachim helping us do? What does the digestive system help? It helps feed us, sustain us. Bread or other food or meat on its own cannot sustain unless it's broken down. The same thing in Seder Hispaalus, as the neshama comes down below, it can't just absorb Elikus Ein Sof, because below everything is midah and gvul, like we learned. Everything has measure and structure. So it has to be spoon-fed, so to speak. So part of that system includes the malachim. But this is now also going to broaden the whole topic. What is our relationship with God? Fine, we have all these interfaces, which of course is the central theme of Ayin Beis. So what's the general relationship when God is so different than we are? And the most obvious fashion, we say Rachem Arachmenu. What does that even mean? What does it mean that God has Rachmanis on us? Human beings are in the same league. So you could say it would be, just to give an example, you have Rachmanis on something that's completely inferior to you. I mean, I guess you could have Rachmanis on an ant if someone steps on it, or it's in anguish. But Rachmanis belongs in the domain, a human domain, like he says, due to the chalishus ha-nefesh ba'adam. So a person is affected by it arouses empathy, like we learned about Yosef. But in talking about God, Ani Hashem Leishanisi, how do you apply Rachmanis altogether there? What does it even mean? And the truth is, Middos in general. So you see from this that we're discussing now a bigger discussion. What's our relationship with God? It's fine to have a relationship with godliness that relates to us, but God, Be'etzem, fundamentally is completely removed. Ani Hashem Leishanisi. And so he's not shaykh to Hispaalus, that something affects him, either Hispaalus, that he gets stimulated or impacted by chesed, or by gvura, or rachamim, like we learned. I'm reviewing what we learned at the bottom of 1427. Ein shaykh lemal dani Hashem leishanisi. Ve'ein shaykh in Hispaalus mazulas. And it's not possible. God is not in that area that has relationships and is impacted by another. Completely different domain, a completely different reality. I mentioned an ant. A good example may be, can we have Rachmanis, for example, on a stone? We don't have Rachmanis on a stone because it's completely not in our domain. Just as an example. It's not obviously a perfect example. So the general Middos, what does that mean? So he began by saying, and we'll see how this is going to come back to the Malachim, but we're going to now, I wouldn't call this digressing, it's going into a broader topic about our relationship with God in this context. So the Chachmei HaMechkar, and he quotes two, the Rambam, Meir Nevuchim, and the Kuzri. So therefore, for this reason, they don't say there's no Middos L'mayla. You can't really say God has emotions, like we have emotions. Emotions that are affected and stimulated one way or another by our environment, by events around us, by the fears of other people, and so on. Like he says, so what does it mean, Chanun v'Rachum, when it says different places, Chanun v'Rachum, that God is compassionate and God is kind and God is loving, and so on. So he says that is when there's hashpah that's affecting human beings in that way, chesed. So you're saying God is in that mode, so to speak. It's not about him. It's not that he's feeling it. It's that's what's being nishpah. The words he used was misaken davar shemidas b'nei adam inarachim miyachsim ala beida harachimim. Because at the end of the day, when compassion is shown to us, let's say we daven to Hashem and Hashem forgives. So it's not that he's being affected by us like we are affected when we interact with each other. It's that the result is that we're getting rachamim. So therefore we associate rachamim. And he gave the example of the shefet, a judge, that he listens to the evidence and then he rules. And he rules in a way that's going to impact people. Either the person is innocent, acquitted, or the person is guilty. There's going to be an emotional reaction, but the shefet himself is detached. Doesn't affect him in any way. But it is coming from him. He's the source of it because he's the one that passed the ruling. So, and according to them, meaning the Chachmei HaMechkar, he does not himself get into the mode of chesed or rachmanis or gvura. When there's ashpa of goodness, it's called chesed. He's called chanun or chazda, and the same thing with gvura and rachmanis. But the Rebbe Rashab is shayl of this. He negates this. He says, "Eina emes kain." Truth is not this way, because we know there are middos l'mayla, and he's quoting, of course, the sources that when we say there's the spheres above, Esser spheres sadyenus, and the seven of the 10 spheres, the seven lower spheres of the 10 are chesed and gvura and rachamim and so on. Which means, and the spheres are not just shem hamushal, they're not just figurative or metaphorical, they're actually divine attributes. And therefore, Chana v'rachem Hashem, Zchei rachamecha v'chasdecha, is all actually applied to godliness, to God. So therefore, back to the question then, how do you explain it in the context of Ani Hashem Leishanisi, as we learned before? And that's where we stopped. I do want to, since I mentioned that he talks about it on chapter 152, I wanted to just point out the interesting thing there. There, he says the language is a little different. He talks also about is MS or not MS. So to look inside there, let me just get the sefer here. 1 second. So in chapter 152, just going to read it quickly. Interesting how he describes it there. There's more detail. And of course, knowing that he has written it earlier, so I'm sure he relies somewhat on what we learned there. Okay, so he says like this. There he calls them the Chokrim. The beginning of chapter 152. In the first edition of Ayin Beis, it's page 298. So he says, there he calls them the Chokrim. So L'mayla lo yesh b'chinas hamidus klal. Okay, like he says here, that L'mayla by Hashem, there's no midus at all. That Hamidus hein Hispaalus, shem ispol b'chesed u'kahai gavna, because the very definition of a midah, intellect is a different thing, you could say, because it's not affected. Intellect is just the mere idea of wisdom, intelligence. Even that is a question, as we discussed briefly, and we'll talk about more later. How do you apply wisdom? But here you have the additional problem. Emotions are by definition based on impact and effect. That's what an emotion is. It's not a detached or abstract experience. Well, the Maila ain't a shaykh in Hispaalus. That's what he says there. That's why they say, the Chokrim say, these philosophers, these thinkers say, that it's only the Pu'ulas HaChesed. Again, very similar to what we're learning here. Oy Pu'ulas HaGvura. Avla etzem amiris the Chesed Gvura lo yesh l'mayla. So it's the Pu'ulas HaChesed. So of course God can show kindness, and he can show compassion, but is he personally, so to speak, kind and compassion? No, he's not an emotional entity. Doesn't have that type of interaction and experience. And here's how the Rebbe Rashab responds to that. V'hinei hanocha shalehem. Their hanocha means their established principle, essentially. Hu emes b'tzad echad, hu b'tzad echad eina emes. So here you see clearly he says both. We learned, he just said emes eina kain. That's how we learned it here in volume 3. There he says on one side, b'tzad echad, from one perspective, from one side of it, there's some truth to what they're saying. There's truth to what they're saying. But from another side, it's not true. So you see here a little more the details. And he says, continues, he says, they're correct in saying that you cannot describe Hispaalus by God. God gets excited, God gets stimulated, gets aroused, gets affected by something. That says, but avamash kosov shelo yesh b'chinas hamidus l'mayla. Rak ha'pu'ula ein ze emes. But to say there's no midus above, only the action of the midah, meaning the result of it, the function of it, the implementation of it, that's not correct. Because there are midus l'mayla, midus ha'chesed, midus ha'gvura, which are the 10 spheres. So that's just wanted to read a few lines from there, just to add a bit. So you see there, when he say Eina Emes Kain, he meant Emes, he's talking about, of course, the main focus here is on Hispaalus. That they are correct in saying. But what's not correct is to say there's no Middas L'mayla. So we'll talk more about this later as we develop the whole idea here. But you see how he qualifies that there on chapter 152. And then it goes on to explain it, very similar to how he explains it here. We're going to go back now to where we're up to. And you can look at there. There you'll see maybe more details. I have to read it through again. If I recall correctly, I think it's very similar to what we're going to learn here.
Thank you very much.
Okay. So now, regarding where we are now, we'll continue on top of page 1428. He's going to answer the question. And I will refer back to chapter 152 because it may help just for language and maybe some explanation. But let's see how he explains it here. And he definitely, in some ways, adds a lot of points here that are not in chapter 152. But they complement each other, obviously. Yeah. So if you're ready, we're ready to go. Top of page 1428, third line. The pages can be found if you want to follow along on ayinbeis.com. So, Aka Inyan Hu. Here's the Inyan. The Middos L'mayla hein Atzmim. The first statement he makes. The Middos L'mayla are Atzmim. Loishe mispolim min Azulas. Hainu min Avroim. Kim shem etzada etzem. So, what he's distinguishing now is that in Middos themselves, emotional attributes, chesed, gvura, teferes, and so on, there's two sides to it. One is that there's the effect. We communicate with each other. You love someone, you show chesed to them. You see someone in need, you feel their pain and empathy and rachmanis. That's Hispaalus. But then there's another thing. Middos Atzmim, what he says Atzmim, means due to God's etzem, and he has every mila, all the qualities, he has these qualities. Not because he's affected by someone. In other words, before the creation of human beings, God emanated 10 spheres. As we learned before the Tzimtzum even, there he's still envisioning it, but he envisions attributes. And these attributes, he's not defined by them, and he's not limited by them. He has much more than them, but just like he has the power to express and reveal himself through Oyer, and so he has also the power to reveal himself through Chesed. So it's the very concept that there's a thing called Chesed. In a way, I don't want to say exactly, but similar to what we learned about Shleimus. The first thing, he created the entity called Chesed, and that he can manifest in Chesed, and can manifest in Gvura, mitzad his Maila. Not because he's affected by something. It's not because something stimulated within God, and therefore he feels kindness to something or to someone. So he says, so it's not mispolim in Atzilus. It's not because it's affected by another. It's from the Nivroim, kin shem mitzad etzem. Due to the very etzem, he has this mile, this Shleimus. The liyeshe b'chinas tev be'etzem, being that God is fundamentally good. Now this too needs to be qualified. He's not defined by being good, but he is good. If you're going to talk about goodness, of course, the ultimate good is God. So he's not defined, but he is fundamentally good. Mizehu shemistayev b'chinas middos hachesed. So from that idea that God is goodness, from there branches off, comes the and drawn out. From there is expressed the middos of chesed. That's regarding chesed. What about gvura? So gvura again is not due to an interaction or a relationship with another. It's due to a power that God has. We know God also has the power, just has the power to bestow chesed, kindness, and to give off, to emanate. He also has the power to limit. Just as has the power to manifest in the infinite, kach keiche begvul. This is from the Avedis HaKodesh from Meir Ibn Gabbai. He also has the power to create something that's finite and to restrain. So this again is a power of God. She says it explicitly. This is coming mitzad Shleimus HaAtzmus. This is not coming due to the fact that he's impacted or is dependent on or interacts with other entities. It's his Shleimus. Like the Avedis HaKodesh writes, So basically, clearly here, from Middos HaGvura is coming from this koyach hagbala, koyach hagvul. And from this, you can imagine that koyach bligvul it really associates more with chesed, which is more the flow, like koyach lahoyer, his power to emanate, to illuminate or to reveal, and the power to conceal. And that's what he says now. B'shar shema atzmi. Where is this all rooted? In the core place in godliness, zeu ma shebiyacholte lahoyer, his ability to reveal, or to shine, to reveal, ubiyacholte shaloi laher, and his capacity to not reveal. So that's how he's explaining Middos Lamaila now. So the Hispaalus part, correct, like we learned in chapter 152, and that correct, the Chachmei Mechka correct, there is no Hispaalus. But there are Middos. And since he's talking already about Chesed and Gvura, he also talks about Rachamim. So let's read one more line. And just like he has Chesed Atzmi, from the beside the Etzem, the Rachamim Atzmi Kamoi Keil Mole Rachamim. We say God is filled with compassion. So this is a Shleimus that he has. It's a quality that God has, just as he has all qualities. Now again, It's like when we say about vision, we say, "Hanetzer ayin lo yabit." The pasuk says, "The one who formed the eye, does he himself not see?" So Chassidus explains, obviously you can't define God as a seeing entity like we're seeing entity. We have eyes. But you also can't say that he doesn't see. So that's what you say. If he can create an eye that sees, so God for sure sees. He's the creator of it. But it doesn't mean that he has eyes. It means he has the Shleimus called the ability to see something, just like to hear something. But it's not defines him because God is beyond it all. He doesn't need eyes to see things. But once we see that there's vision in creation, we can extrapolate and say, then just as we have vision, God definitely has vision. And then we qualify and say, but it's not like our vision. Like we say, if we have wisdom, God for sure has wisdom, but it's not a knowable wisdom like our wisdom. It's something like saying, you're saying, you can't say God has wisdom, so you say he does not have, but you can't say, you say he does not have wisdom. So you can't say he has it because it's not like our wisdom, but you also can't say he doesn't have it because the Shleimus dictates that he would have everything. And if he creates it, it means that it came from somewhere. So he's not defined by it. So when we say the human being is created b'tselem Elokim, that doesn't mean that God is an art tselem. It means that God, aspect of godliness, manifested itself in a structure called tselem Elokim, which has 10 attributes, and God created that as a template. He created the human being in that image. But God is far more than that. If you remember, we learned this at length in the Mittler Rebbe's Maimer HaMagbi and other places. He defines existence, but existence doesn't define him. So if there's any Shleimus that exists, obviously it comes from God, but he's not defined by it. It's just an important point to just emphasize. He's not saying that explicitly here, but it's important to underscore that. So now what about Rachmim? That's the inyan, like we said, the shiny, the radiating glow or aura on the living king, God. From that branches off, from that stems Midas Harachmim, the attribute of compassion. Okay. So that's briefly the answer to the question. Now, I do want to go back to chapter 152 because I noticed there are some terms that may be helpful here. Since we have it, might as well look at it. He says like this. The way he explains it there, he says, I mean, it's a similar idea, but the words are a little different. He says, Ki etzem amidus lamayla eino mitzad yiseidus hazulos. The very essential emotions above are not due to the yiseidus hazulos. Like he said here, it's not due to the fact that another awakens or stimulates that. Because that's a relationship that's commensurate of two entities. He mitzad Shleimus HaAtzmus. So there he used the word Shleimus HaAtzmus, which he also used here by the Gevurah, he said Shleimus HaAtzmus, mitzad HaShleimus. There he says Shleimus HaAtzmus, Val Kain hein tomid bebchinas Hispaalus. That's why the 10 spheres are not just when God is actually emanating chesed, there's chesed. There's always chesed, because it's all part of Shleimus HaAtzmus. God always has chesed. When it comes to human beings, the Hispaalus is only when it's stimulated. You can't say you could say a person has chesed, dormant, innate chesed in their soul, but active chesed, no, you don't say that. You say the active chesed is when they're interacting, when there's a stimulation. But Lamaila, even when he's not effectuating chesed, he also has chesed. Okay, then he goes on to speak about Achdus. I don't want to go there. I just wanted to read that line. So that was about just an additional kvetch, so to speak, diuk, that can help here as well. So let me stop if anyone has questions. And now he's going to continue. The story's not over yet, because the obvious question remains, what do you mean? We have stories where we say God is affected. We sometimes describe Hispaalus, that God is directly affected by us. Taka, in this case, not Middos that we're talking about. The very fact that he has Middos is not due to us, and the contrary, our Middos come from him. You can actually say that. He doesn't say that explicitly here, but that's the fact. First, God had Middos, and then he created humans that also have Middos. But it's not because of humans. But we do know that we do find that there's a Hispaalus that we got, God is affected by our Avodah. So he's going to discuss that soon. But first he wanted to establish what's going on with Ani Hashem Leishanisi. It's not Hispaalus, it's due to his Shleimus, that he has these attributes. But again, he's not defined by that. Even though he has them, like he has everything, all the qualities. So if there are any questions, I'll be happy to take questions, and then we'll continue.
How do we access it then? I mean, what are we getting actually then? I mean,
what do you mean? I mean, if you're getting kindness, if God shows you,
he's showing us kindness, but he's not. It doesn't mean anything to him. I don't understand. He's not.
I don't understand your question. Right now, all of us are right here breathing. Our heart is beating. We're alive. We have blessings in our lives. We benefit from God's chesed every second.
Yes.
Why does he have to? Why does he have to be affected by it?
Not that he has
He's
to,
God.
but how do we?
He has the quality. 1 second. Let me finish. He has the quality to show kindness. He has the quality to show compassion. The quality to show gvura, strength or restraint or whatever. Why does he have to be affected by the fact that he is giving us these blessings?
I don't say that he's affected. What I'm saying is, yes, you're grateful. We're grateful for all the chesed he shows us. But let's say you want an additional thing that is.
So he could do that. So fine. Anyway, we didn't finish the subject.
Right,
we didn't finish the subject.
All right.
And so first of all, you can simply say he opened up the door. You can always ask him for more. That doesn't mean he's affected. The judge that rules and is not affected by his judgment, you can ask him for compassion. You can ask him for mercy, and he may show it. But doesn't mean he's affected by it.
Okay.
Just on a very basic level. But it's going to get the plot thickens a little more complicated than that, so we'll soon see that.
All right. Thanks, Rabbi.
If you think about it logically, it makes total sense. God is not us. The very fact that we can say God has a relationship with us begs a lot of questions. What does that mean? So you could say there's a dimension of godliness that manifests in existence, mamala kalalman, where we interact with. But like when we say the Shekhinah is begolus, together with us in exile, are we talking about Atzmus, or are we talking about the Shekhinah, Malchus, and so on? So we're soon going to learn more about all this. If you want the bigger picture, you have to learn all of this. Now, we already learned all this, just for the record. So this is all out there already, and I discussed it at length. I'm not going to go over everything I discussed the first time. I'm going to keep mostly to the main theme regarding the interface with God and us, and to keep, like I was sticking this time around, not to every detail, but more the bigger picture here. But we're gonna go through it because it's important to the relationship, obviously. Are there any other questions?
This might not be the question for now, but if we're to relate to Hashem as a judge, and we know all the laws around not bribing judges, I wonder, like, how that correlates to how could we possibly, quote unquote, bribe Hashem? Like, what's an example of that?
I wouldn't discuss that here. It's not relevant here.
I have a question. When we go up to that high, when we try to reach the highest levels of Atzmus, there's a level of lo ani Hashem lo shanisi. First of all, when we say that he has the meat of the chesed rachmin, but then we say there's a higher level, a deeper level, so to speak, Yecholis for la higher, Yecholis la helm atzmi to reveal and not to reveal. At that level we're talking about, and that's the source for the Middos. So, and that's a deeper level. At that level, we don't even use the term the chesed or gevor. We say it has the yecholis. So how is it? And then, so what I'm trying to say is that at the highest levels, we've lost the term chesed and gevura, and we come to the yecholis to give chesed and gevura, which yecholis seems to be even higher and deeper. And my question to you is, there is ani Hashem lo shanisi, but there's also a level of actus pshitas. don't we say that at the highest levels of godliness, there's no hispaalus at all? There's no, you can't break it down into Esther spheres, benuzos, Esther spheres, Yeholis, or even Yeholis. Don't we just say it's beyond all of that? Yeholis and everything, pshitas it can't be differentiated.
That's correct. But he's not talking about that level here. He's talking about the level of Middos. His question here is, are there Middos? We're talking already once there are spheres. Because he began the whole thing that Esther spheres show us that God does have emotions. So you're right. In Atzmus, this doesn't apply to Atzmus. You could say, like he said, that the Middos are rooted in the Yecholte Lahoy, Yecholte Shalei Lahoy. But if you go all the way up, you're talking about a seamless unity that like I said, is not defined by anything, and even not even defined by the Middos. But here we're talking how God is already so-called emanating and expressing himself through Middos. So it is not the highest level here.
Not the highest level. And also the level of Ani Hashem Lo Shnisi is quote unquote like even a lower level than Achdus B'Pshitas, because it shows that there's are those two identical, synonymous? Ani Hashem Lo Shnisi and Achdus B'Pshitas? Atzmus Alain?
It's a good question. Let me say this. This will become more clear as we learn more the topic, but I will say the following. I think we learned it earlier as well. I have to find where. We spoke about Ani Hashem Leishanisi. Let me just see something. Give me a moment. When we spoke about who, it was on page, there we go. I'm looking at 1413. There's something that just jogged my memory. Give me a moment. Okay. It's a good opportunity to bring this up. Ultimately, because Nisava Kadosh Baruch Hu Liyasle is Baruch Dir B'Tachtenim, God desired to have a home in this world. And this world, Tachtenim, is a world, by definition, that's completely not just subject to Shinui and change, it's defined by Shinui and change. Everything is changing. The weather changes. We age every moment. Everything is transitioning from one state to another, metamorphosizing. So it's going from one generation to the next generation, every individual. Everything is changeable. Everything is essentially temporal and ever changing. And then there's Ani Hashem Leishanisi, we say something that's not changing at all, immutable. Now, God desired, Atzmus desired, to have a home in the world of change. So the way we explain it is that ultimately the goal is, through our Avodah, to bring into the world of change that level of immutability of no change, to bring Nitzchias into the moment. So example, the Alter Rebbe writes in Tanya, in chapter 25, I believe, he says that when you do a mitzvah, yichud zeh, the yichud that you create through a mitzvah, nitzchihu l'mayla la'ilam vod. Everything in life that we do is temporary. The money we make, our looks, our physical beings, everything is temporary. Everything is mortal and subject, therefore, to aging and erosion and deterioration, and ultimately perishes. Nothing is forever. There's no such thing as nitzchias in the human level. The only real nitzchias is God. When you connect to eternal values, to eternal standards. That's why when we do a mitzvah or learn Torah, what you're doing is introducing eternity into a temporary world. And ultimately you want to create and show that this world of change can really manifest eternity itself that comes from Hashem himself. Now, initially, it sounds like a contradiction. But if you think about it, it's not. Because when you do a mitzvah right now, in a certain moment, many mitzvahs are time-bound. Time-bound by definition is shinui. You can't daven shacharis in the evening. You can't bring a korban tomorrow for today. Pesach is on Pesach, and it's not not the day before, not a day after. And yet, in one moment, in one fleeting, changing moment, you can turn that moment eternal when you do a mitzvah, when you bring godliness into it. I mean, today you see this. Today it's already a cliche. When you show kindness to someone, it's forever. They'll forever remember it. So you can take moments and things that are changing and turn them into an eternal experience. In the fullest sense of the word is when we do this completely, and our whole lives are manifesting eternal experiences, eternal values. Now, what's the point that I'm making here is this. So the bridge from Leisha Nisi to Shinui is essentially going from the highest levels of Elikus. I don't know how deep you can go, because when you talk Atzmus itself, even Shinui or no Shinui, you can say are also two states. And you wouldn't even call them Leisha Nisi. You'd say God is beyond change and beyond no change. That's the truth, but I don't want to go there right now. But regardless, at some point, just like we learned that God, first there's the Achilus, and then there's which is like the Helam Atzmi, Yecholte, Achilus, then the Achilus comes into Atzmi, and Kol Batzmuse, then there's the Kedem Aleis HaRatzon, and there's Aleis HaRatzon. What you're having is within Lifnei HaTzimtzum, where there's no change yet, God himself is, so to speak, going through stages. You could say, isn't that change? As soon as he desires to have existence, it's a change from the moment before that he didn't desire it. Obviously, we're talking conceptually. But the point being is it's not really a change, because it's Atzmus itself, that's what he wants. I mean, in some ways, it's part of the theme of the Basa Lagani this year. We learned chapter 15, 1985, when the Rebbe spoke, the chapter 15, he spoke about the Tzimtzumim before the Tzimtzum Arishan, and discussed what I'm saying now. That there are levels between Atzmus before the Tzimtzum Arishan that also go through Tzimtzumim. So all of that you can say are changed, but they're not changes like we change. You can't say God ages, God forbid, or there's changes in his very being. You can say what we're learning here, that he in his Shleimus has chosen to manifest in Chesed and Gvura and Tiferes. And that is, yes, a level that's lower than the level before he chose to do that. So the point is that ultimately, and this is going to be the challenge, is how we can find a bridge between the two. But ultimately, the 10 spheres end up being the ultimate interface. Because on one hand, they're divine attributes that are atzmim and are not subject to change. Like he said, it's not Hispaalus. It's atzmis de kekech. God has these attributes because he chose to have these attributes. He's not defined by the attributes, but he has them. And then he chooses to manifest them. Then he chooses to create an existence that will be subject to change, and their middos, meaning the middos b'nei Adam, human middos, are changeable. And then he says, when you do tzedakah with each other and you show chesed to each other, you are drawing down my chesed that is beyond change. So here you have how God's immutable chesed, Leisha Nisi, is manifesting in our changeable chesed, which is the human chesed. And the more we integrate it, the more we're connecting eternity to the world of the world of change and mutability of our lives. That is briefly, ultimately, what's going to be happening here in this whole discussion. And so it's actually to our advantage, because we want to unite. We want to unite with God. If we said that only our relationship with God is only in Atzilus, only where God is Middos are subject to our relationship with us, then you're not uniting with the God, the Leisha Nisi aspect of God that's beyond all of that. So it actually is a quality that is tremendous because we remember the interface, you want it to be complete. You want to have the Lo Shanisi in the process as well, not just the Shinui part. So that's somewhat a little explanation that I hope helps answer your question as well.
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you. Bringing Lo Shanisi, doing a mitzvah brings eternity into temporality, temporal.
Yeah, it's unbelievable. It's beautiful. Yeah.
Easy.
I mean, look, at the end of the day, that's really, when you're Eved Hashem, you're taking your mortal and limited life, finite existence, and turning it into immortal and to infinite. Yeah. I don't like to lahavdil bring in, quote, a non-Jewish poet and thinker and mystic, but William Blake, in that famous poem, I once wrote about it, and I'll tell you what I wrote. That's why I'm bringing it up. So he writes that famous line with the famous lines where he says, how does he put it? To see.
Tiger, are you talking about?
To hold infinity in your palm of your hand?
Yeah, but it begins before that. It starts off to see a heaven. No. I'll tell you in a minute why I'm bringing it. 1 second. Yeah. Here's to see a world in a grain of sand and a heaven in a wildflower. Hold infinity in the palm of your hand and eternity in an hour. Okay, right? Quite well said. So I wrote an article once, it was, I think, Parsha A, where it talks about nosein titein, about giving tzedakah. So I said, okay, Blake said you could hold infinity in the palm of your hand and eternity in an hour, but he doesn't tell us how. He just says it. It's a nice poetic flourish, but how? And in Chassidus it explains that when a person gives tzedakah, you're actually taking your palm of your hand, because you're giving tzedakah with your hand. So the Baal Shem Tov says something really powerful. He says, you're creating infinity because it's Yud Kei Vav Kei. The Yud is the coin. The Hey is the 5 fingers of the hand of the giver. The Vav is the outstretched hand that you're reaching out to the person who you're giving the coin to. And the final Hey is the 5 fingers of the hand of the recipient. So Nosen Titein means, he says, that you're actually creating Yud Kei Vav Kei when you give tzedakah. So this way our hands are limited, we all know, and we do many good things with our hands, but they're all mortal and or finite. But when you give tzedakah, like I said, you're holding infinity in the palm of your hand. So I used William Blake, but I added that you have to do it through, obviously you have to now actualize it, not just conceptual, not just an abstract idea. Yeah. Okay. Any other questions? It's a heavy topic.
That was beautiful. I never heard that before. Thank you.
Yeah.
Agreed. And I love also using Chochmas Olam for our purposes, Chassidus.
Yeah. I could tell you as an aside, is years and years ago, maybe 25 years ago, 30 years ago, I started raising money for our organization then, which wasn't easy to do, trust me. And I went to see someone who was coming to my classes. It was well-to-do, and but he liked to challenge me all the time. So he said to me, "Tell me, can you capture in few lines the power of what you do, as well as William Blake captured it in this poem. He challenged me with that. And I'd heard the poem before, but he said, think of it, just 4 lines, and look what he captures. So I came back to him, I said, yeah, when you give tzedakah, you create infinity in the palm of your hand. And he gave us a nice donation just for that.
That's
So I
great.
used it. Yeah.
Excellent.
Okay, good. Here we are. I want to say one more thing. I said in the past, when God says to Moshe Rabbeinu, "Lo yireni adam v'chai," no person can see me and live. So I've explained from the Rebbe explains it, and there's also from the Baal HaFlaw in his commentary on Torah, that this doesn't mean that you can't see God. It means you can't see him with your eyes. And you can see him only when you don't look. Which means, as we climb the ladder and we get closer to uniting ourselves with the godly reality, the highest levels of godliness, it's not a compromise to not feel yourself and your consciousness. You know, on lower levels, we feel the benefits of connecting to eternity. I mean, even what I just said now, doing a mitzvah and you bring eternity to your life is a very compelling case for living a godly life, because you're taking a very immortal, seemingly fleeting life that will come and go, and you're turning it to something eternal. So when we talk about Avraham and Sarah almost 4,000 years after they lived, perfect example. Mazare b'chaim, afu b'chaim. Their children, their legacy, gave them eternal life, essentially. But then there are levels where you become so absorbed in the experience and you are ready for it. It's like a student in the beginning process. You need to understand what you're learning. You can't say, I'm going to become so absorbed in my teacher, because it has to be first on your terms. As you learn them on your terms and you grow, then there comes a point where you can become so absorbed that you don't even realize, or it's not even matters to you, that you're not conscious of it, because you become one with it. So the deeper you go, you mentioned before, it's not even Middos. It's true, you come to a level where you become so one with God that it's not you anymore in the conventional sense. When I say not you, it's not that you're annihilated, it's that you have expanded your containers to the point that you can now actually experience something which was initially not even possible, not even mortal or human. That's the ultimate Achdus. But you can't get there without first going through b'chol levavcha, b'chol nafshecha, b'chol meidecha, mutfa, murgish, muskel. I just wanted to throw this into the picture as well. I've mentioned a number of times, but I think it's worthwhile mentioning as well. So there comes a point where it's not like I need to know that I did something and God responded to me. That's correct on lower levels. But then there comes a point, it becomes so seamless and oneness that it's not even that type of experience. You're just completely, you become, we'll call it a noun instead of a verb. It's no longer an experience, it's a state of being. It's like water doesn't get wet. Water is wetness. Dry things get wet. So initially we're not godly, so humans are having a godly experience. But once you are able to absorb godliness, you can actually call yourself an extension of godliness. Not God, there's only one God always, but you have become a complete channel, like being in the zone of that higher state of reality, higher consciousness.
Is that what happened to you?
So of course, there's many levels. I'm sorry, what were you asking?
I'm sorry, Rabbi. I was just thinking, is that what happened to you when you listened to the Rebbe talk? Is it a sort of an analogy? Obviously, it's not the same thing. But is
At
it
the
now?
best, at the best scenario, that was what happened. Yes, you completely get absorbed in the experience. But as I gave examples, have you never read a book where you don't even realize you're turning pages and you're just so absorbed in the experience you
Yeah,
could be crying and laughing?
yeah,
We
sure.
all have examples of it. And then afterwards, you step back and say, "Hey, I just experienced something. I didn't even realize how I became one with it." This is the ultimate bittul. So it's not like you're not annihilated. You're not nullified. You just cease to be yourself in the experience. You become one with the experience. This is when you're in the zone. I mean, it happens to me when I write sometimes. I'm sure anyone who's written knows what I'm talking about. Not always. You always hope for that moment, but when you get into really in the zone and you're writing and it's just flowing through you, it's the ultimate pleasure because you're no longer like there's no what's the word for it? There's no resistance.
Right.
There's what do they call today for? There's no conductivity. So there's superconductivity. There's not even any drop of. They're looking for that superconductivity where the electricity flows through the channels without any resistance at all. What is it called? I think it's called superconductivity. Am I right? Um, so you become like totally a channel for that which is flowing through you.
But not that you're not God because there's only one God, but that you are God because you joined that one. You became part of that one. So you together you are
Yeah, but he
one.
didn't become. But yeah, but that's not your God. You're part of godliness, was what we would call it, because there's only one God, and God did not do it through you. He didn't
But that's
do
not
it.
separate.
Anyway, I said it the way I thought is the right way to say it. I wouldn't say that you have become God.
Could I say something? Last week when we got to page 1424, when we came up to with Moedecha, finally Moedecha. I've been waiting for Moedecha the whole time. We go through B'chol Levav Chol Nashchol Moedecha. We finally reach Yichud of the highest level of Shmo Kolol Bas Mutzai. And I'm saying to myself, why doesn't the Rebbe end Ayin Beis there? We've climbed the mountain. As you remember, we started in the first volume climbing the mountain. We got up to the highest levels of Yichud of Shmo Kolol Bas Mutzai. And we planted our flag, so to speak, on Mount Everest of spirituality. So it should. What do we? Why do we have to go? That's it. We've got the highest level that a human being is possible of yichud with Atzmus. So, and then I think about that for a whole week, and I came down to realize that the mountain climbing that we talked about and used to speak about as an analogy quite a bit in the earlier volumes, especially of climbing the mountain. The idea is not to climb the mountain. You have to bring it down. You have to climb down, bring that mountain down. Ratzu v'shuv. It's and I was saying to myself, oh, now I understand about Shmona Esrei, because why after Avos, Hafta in Shema, we've reached the highest pinnacle of Yichud. What's going? Why does the davening continue, especially into Shmona Esrei? And I was thinking, what do we bring down from that ultimate yichud on the highest levels of spirituality? And what are we going to bring down from there? We planted our flag. We have to bring down something from that incredible journey that we've taken over the last 10, 12 years of going up, climbing the ladder, climbing the mountain. And I was thinking that maybe that's the bittul that you have, the yichudi law that you have to bring that down the mountain because the mountain climbing is not just to go up there, you got to come down. And it's interesting to know, by the way, and those are people that climb Mount Everest, I looked it up, more people pass away, Rahman Islam, climbing down Mount Everest than climbing up. And I was thinking about the Sherpas. The Sherpas could be like the Malachim that are helping us. They help bring us up and they help us come down. They help the journey for the person. But I just wanted to finalize that thoughts because I've been literally thinking about this whole week. Is that what do we bring it down? What are we bringing down? What's that whole journey up the mountain, bringing it down? If maybe we could say that you're bringing down the level of Yehudi Allah Achdus, the bittul, the tachlis of bittul, into Shemona Esrei, where we would talk about that Olam Hazeh Gashmi, all our Gashmistic needs and all our things are the physical world. We're bringing down a new perspective, a new way of looking at it, and bringing down that eternity that you were talking about today into our temporary lives. And that then when I realized that could be a shot, I don't know, I'd like your reflection on it.
First of all, if you go back to the page you just cited, 1424, he says explicitly, Rabbi Akiva, nichnas b'shalom v'yotze b'shalom, right? So Rabbi Akiva did exactly that. He went into the b'shalom, he went to that level, and then he brought it down, and he says clearly that after you go there, the goal is to bring down the ato yigdal na koyach adnai from b'chol meidecha and that higher level of yichud into koyach maisev higid la'amei, creation. And we're going to learn later, and we've learned earlier, that ultimately, after Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, we say, V'ahavta Hashem Elokecha b'chol levavcha, b'shnei yitzarecha. You bring it down to the Nefesh Habamis. The Nefesh Habamis also should experience it. So the ultimate goal is correct, is to bring that b'chol meidecha, this highest level of yichud. That's why I said, Dira b'tachtonim. Not just that you go there and that's that. That the existence itself is the end, literally the end of Ayin Beis. The Rebbe Rashab ends on that note, that there's yichud tata, that's the yichud of the divine on the terms of existence. Yichud Elah is the yichud beyond existence, transcendence. And the third is that in existence itself, you see the highest levels of godliness. Look on page 1477, the last page of this Hemshech. He literally talks about it, and I elaborated at the time at length about that. He says those words. That's the ultimate Mashiach times. That the whole world will be like the water filling the divine knowledge, that like water fills the earth. Filling the world with divine knowledge as the waters fill the earth, as the waters fill the sea, I should say. And Eined Movade, saturating and permeating everything in existence.
Oh yeah, thank you. Very exciting. I've gained so much. I've gained so much from this review.
Great, good. So now, next section. So what they talked till now was about the levels of Elokus. Let's see, how he called it Atzmim. Basically, the very early stages of the emanation of these attributes. But now, don't be thrown by this, but you're going to see that even in the divine, you also have Hispaalus on lower levels. So he's going to say like this now. Middos kamoshem ba'Atzilus. And the Middos, as they come into Atzilus, this is already after the Tzimtzum. And now we have a world called Atzilus. It's a spiritual world, but it's a world with spheres. Hein bebchinas Hispaalus. The Middos here are in a level of Hispaalus. They are affected. In contrast to how these Middos are Atzmim, as they are Lifnei Tzimtzum in the 10 hidden spheres, or even or as they're rooted in the Yecholte Lahoyer, Yecholte Shaloi Lahoyer. V'hainu sha'chesed hu shemispal b'bchinas hagili. So we said that chesed was the source of gili. So he says mispal b'bchinas hagili. In other words, it's engaging with, it's not detached from the gili. We'll soon understand what is mispal. Ugvuru shemispal b'bchinas hatzimtzum. And Gvura means that it's impacted and engages with the Tzimtzum. And Rachamim is the integration and the harmony, the connection, the bonding between Gili of Chesed and Tzimtzum of Gvura. So now we're talking about Middos that are engaging, and they're not Hispaalus like necessary human interactions, but nevertheless, there is an interaction going on. Now, he's going to explain it, but let me just stop for a moment and I'll explain. You may have recalled we learned the Maimer Erdena is a Maimer, a very famous classic Maimer from the Alter Rebbe in Teira. Sometimes it's called Pasach Aliyah, because he brings that Maimer from the Tikkun Ezer. So he asked the question, what means Erdena? God says, let us descend below to see where the great cry and anguish is coming from Sodom. So we're talking about the wicked city of Sodom and the cries from the people who were suffering at the hands of the Sodomites reached heaven, and God says, let us go down and see what's happening. So of course the question is, what do you mean going down from where? Where's God going from? God sees everything. He's all-knowing, and all aware. So the Alter Rebbe there explains at length, based on the Pasuk Aliyot, Kunizeyah, that this is the concept of Atzilus of the spheres. Of course, everything is known by him, but does he know it like we know it? Does he engage with it? Or is it more like aloof or detached, a bird's eye view? So he explains the difference to Yodeya and Yodua. Yodua means it's known. You can know something from a distance. Yodeya means I know because I saw it with my own eyes. Now, obviously, you could say, wait a second, God sees everything wherever he is. But Kavyachal, to make it make sense to us, there's a stage where God says, I will engage. Imi anechi b'tzara. So it's all Kavyachal, so to speak. You can't say it in literal terms, but it is a level of godliness as it manifests in 10 spheres, and he engages with it. And that engagement is what he's calling Hispaalus. Now that's not Atzilus. That's not in the root where it originates from, is the Middos Atzmim, like he said, in the Atzmim, not nothing to do with anything. That's simply God has different quality, different attributes. But then he's using these attributes to engage. And that is what he's addressing right now. So it's not just the Leisha Nisi and the highest level that engages with our world of Shinui. In the worlds itself, Atzilus is the bridge between these two. This is a big, big topic, obviously. I'm just giving you a little, just a tip of the iceberg, so to speak, be able to make sense of what he's going to say here. But he's going to explain this now in the next section pretty elaborately. And that's going to come back to help us understand the role of the Malachim, because they're part of the processors. Why does God need them to supervise? God can supervise himself. What does he need? Einei Hashem. Why does God need eyes? He has his own eyes, so to speak. Because they are like the king's ministers that God appoints in order to be more involved in the affairs of existence as his representatives. It makes it easier for us to understand the interface when we have these levels, these, like the angels, same thing, Einei Ha'eda, the leaders, because they serve as a type of bridge between the divine ambassadors, but at the same time, they're more engaged and relate more to existence. So you say chesed of Atzilus, on one hand, it's God's chesed, but on the other hand, it's an act of chesed that we can relate to. It's something we can hold on to and say, okay, when I do chesed, I relate to God's chesed. And God's chesed is higher than just chesed. It goes all the way back to Yecholte Lahoyer, all the way to levels of Leisha Nisi. So you have now an in-between place that on one hand has something in common with us, on the other hand, it's not in common with us. And that's where the interface really becomes so powerful. I hope that was clear. Now, a lot of what I'm explaining here is taken from earlier parts of Ayin Beis and other parts of Chassidus, because the Rebbe Rashab here is relying that we have learned that. He's not elaborating on all of that I just said, but if you learn earlier, you learn about Atzilus, made it very clear, especially the Maimer, Paschalio or Erdana. I should add, in Tafresh Nun Ches, the Rebbe Rashab actually wrote a whole commentary on that Maimer in Torah Er. It's considered one of the very fundamental discourses in Chassidus that I learned, that is like gloss and commentary on the Alter Rebbe's Maimer. It also includes some Tzedek's notes and the Rebbe Marash's notes. So you have the Alter Rebbe, some Tzedek, Rebbe Marash, and the Rebbe Rashab, all in one booklet. It's like around 70, 80 pages, maybe more, 80, I think 80, 90 pages maybe. So a lot of what I'm saying is coming from those, either again earlier in Ayin Beis or from those Maimarim.
That's the Maimer Pasach Eliyahu, the 80-page compendium.
The Maimer Paschal originally is in Torah Er from the Alter Rebbe, Vayera, called Erdana. Then there's the Rebbe Rashab in Tafresh Nun Ches, where he wrote the whole, maybe he delivered it as well. I think he wrote a whole so-called explanation of that mimer of the Alter Rebbe. So now we've entered this Hispaalus, but he's going to explain. But first, let's do the parentheses, and then he's going to explain that the Hispaalus is not like it is in human interactions, where we are literally affected by each other. So it's Hispaalus, but not Hispaalus yet, as it is on the human level. So you see here the stages of the interface of how Middos, from godly Middos, become ultimately human Middos, and vice versa, and backwards as well, as we retrace the steps. So he says like this now. Another way of explaining the Middos, Gam Yeshlemer could also say the Chesed hu b'chinas habitl v'ayichud v'hakavona halyena b'chinas hagilui. Okay. So he's now giving another explanation, additional explanation. Then we say Chesed. One second, let me just see something. Yeah. A very interesting parentheses. I remember when we learned it the first time as well, I pointed that out. So before we learn that the Middos are Atzmim, because God has these ability of all attributes, his Shleimus dictates that he can show Chesed, and same with Gvura, and same with Rachamim. But why? Why would he show it? What's the purpose of it? So he's saying now that Chesed of Atzilus is a lower level, because now it's the bitl and the yichud that we have in the kavanah when we think about it and contemplate on it. So it's one thing that God has these attributes. It's another is our bitl and yichud that we experience when we think about what was the intention of him showing chesed, which is b'chinas hagili. So it's not just because God wanted to be kind, it's because he wanted to reveal himself. Imek nadir b'tachtenim means God is creating an existence. He wants us to build a home for him, but in the process, he's revealing himself. And there's an intention in that revelation. So chesed is, yes, on one hand, it's the concept of kindness, but it's also understanding the bitla and yichud that we are experiencing when we contemplate on it and understanding the purpose of it. That's what the Rebbe Rashab is adding here. It's very brief, there's a lot that can be said about it, but it's one of these very rare, I find it rare may not be the right word, one of these not so common explanations that you find in a mimer in understanding a concept of this nature. So before he said, it's the mispol, the b'chinas hagili. Now he's explaining it's not the mispol as much as yesh lemer. Well, not in addition to that, is the bitla and yechud in the kavana. What is the kavana in this gili? And the same thing with gvura. The gvura hu bitla v'yechud b'kavana sheb'chinas hatzimtzum. So it's essentially that we are connecting to God and trying to understand what is this chesed about, what is the gili, the purpose of gili, and what is the purpose of tzimtzum, the intention. The tiferes hu abitl vayichud b'yichud beis hamadreges the kavanas hagili. I'm sorry, and tiferes is the bitl and the yichud. And it's interesting, he uses bitl and yichud as the words he used before by Shema. The bitl that we divest ourselves from our being and we unite ourselves with the divine. So we're moving into the divine form of chesed of understanding the intention of, first of all, the gili of chesed, second the kavanah of the tzimtzum, and now Tiferes is the combination of both. That the kavanah sagili hu idea tzimtzum, like we learned before, that the kavanah, the intention of gili, is that it should come through a tzimtzum and reach us. The kavanah sad tzimtzum hu agili, and the intention of the tzimtzum is to bring to gili, and that's what he says is Tiferes. U'commission is bar li'il, like we learned earlier. We spoke about right here on page 1424. Kavanas tzimtzum is b'shvil gili, and kavanas gili is for the tzimtzum. So what's he adding in this parentheses? He's adding this parentheses, at least the way I understand it, that there's two things here. There's the Middos of Hashem. Okay, we've determined that they're higher than Hispaalus as they are in their root. But then in Atzilus, there is some engagement. Not engagement, you'll soon see what that means. But what he's adding here is wants to show us that you can engage with God's Middos and it still does not have an impact on God, because it's us understanding and connecting to God's attributes, trying to get the experience. In human terms, when I receive chesed from you, kindness from you, or compassion, it's a two-way street. There's a certain interaction. Something I need and you're providing. Compassion, empathy, chesed, gvura. Here, it's not so much this two-way street, it's more of us being absorbed into the bitla and yichud of what is God's middos about. So we're going away from our middos into experiencing what godly middos are and what their intention is. Now, there could be other ways to explain this parentheses, but that's what comes to mind immediately when we learn it. Any questions? Omnom, however, this Hispaalus that we're talking about in Atzilus, Einem min hanevroim. That's not because the creations or the creatures have evoked an effect on God, have impacted God. Hainu liyas hagili el hanevroim. But rather, it's about that there should be a gili that they should relate to. That's the meaning here. We're not talking about a Hispaalus like I said in a relationship where two people who are commensurate to each other, so they show kindness, compassion, and so on. Here it's not min hanevroim. It's liyas hagili hanevroim. V'loish hanevroim goyrim in bechinas Hispaalus hagili. It's not that they are causing this Hispaalus hagili, the generating and the affecting of this revelation. That's why he added in the parentheses that it's all about our bitla and yichud to understand God's middos, not about us stimulating God's middos. Ube'emes, well, let me skip the parentheses for a moment. Ki'im etzad HaAtzmus. This is all due to Atzmus. Hainu mitzad hakavana el yena. Due to the kavana el yena, because God wants to express these different attributes. So it's all coming from God's so-called initiative. It's not coming from us stimulating it. And then he says, in Ayin Sub higher than Atzilus, you can't even call it Hispaalus because it's just purely his attributes. And Middos Atzilus is Hispaalus. And what does he mean by that? Inyan Hispaalus hainu b'chinas ha'hergish. It's taking shape and form. It's coming into a tangible experience and a tangible expression, I should say. Like we learned earlier, that the middos in the human, for example, is about feeling hergesh atzmei. You're feeling your emotion. So here we're not talking about the stimulation that one person stimulates another, but more that is coming into a tangible expression, as opposed to an abstract one of just abstract attributes. And that is due to the fact that because the Middos of Atzilus came through a tzimtzum. That tzimtzum, that diminishment, caused those attributes that were purely Shleimus HaAtzmus should now manifest themselves in actual, tangible, and emotions that you can sense. Remember, we spoke about letters, that they're letters rooted in the Etzem HaNefesh, and there they have no substance at all. They're completely conceptual. But then even God has letters of thought and letters of speech. When God said Yehi Oyer, there was words were said. Yehi Oyer, Vayomer Elokim Yehi Oyer. Now, what's the difference to when he said Yehi Oyer and when he thought about Yehi Oyer and when it was rooted all the way Yechelus, Yecholte Lahoyer in Atzmus? The difference is, did it come into any tangible form that can be experienced by another? So from God's point of view, there's no change. It's all part of one seamless unity. But from our point of view, there's a big difference between thought and speech, because thought, we don't know what he's thinking, and speech, you hear the words. So speech gives it that tangible substance. Now, did God need that? He didn't need it, but he wanted to do that in order to interact with an existence that we can relate to him, and we can retrace the steps and connect. So bottom line, what he's saying here is that there's a level where there's completely no attributes altogether. Then there's attributes mitzat Shleimus HaAtzmus that are just, but they are not Hispaalus. You can't call them experience. They're not attributes that have an experience. Then they have an experience in Atzilus, but not due to the Nevraim. It's just an experience, a tangible expression. And then, of course, there's the lower levels, which we haven't learned yet, which is when it comes down all the way below. So that's what he added here in this explanation. And the parentheses I skipped was intentionally because in the parentheses he says, "Ube'emes b'yisedes hanivroim es chased aleim b'midas hachesed Atzilus." The truth is, there's another element that when we stimulate, we can actually stimulate chesed of Atzilus, and the same opposite, God forbid. Rak b'mesh shayach hanivroim einu b'chinas Hispaalus. So what are you saying here? That we don't stimulate that. He's talking about the divine energy that God uses in creation. It's not in the form of Hispaalus. So he's adding that there is an aspect that our avodah does impact, but he doesn't want to talk about that right now. That will be discussed later. That's why I didn't want to confuse matters. We'll soon just talk about that. Right now he's talking about how it travels from the top down, from the divine essence that's completely seamless to attributes, atzmim, middos l'mayla, what they mean, to the point of middos Hispaalus, but not due to nivroim. Hispaalus simply hargosha, they're tangible, like they come down from etzem hanefesh into faculties and then into thought and speech. And that is Hispaalus of Atzilus, due to the tzimtzum. You're getting this pretty heavy stuff. I think I'm going to stop here. Yeah, it's a good place to stop. A lot more to say on this topic.
Rabbi.
I hope you haven't been. It's pretty overwhelming, and I hope everybody getting something out of this.
I have a clarifying question.
Okay.
So earlier we read that the Middos are be'etzem, and in Hashem's etzem, from there, they come to manifest in the way that we could identify them. But really, the Middos are be'etzem. That's the explanation to how Hashem and his Middos, right? Middos are be'etzem Hashem.
I don't know what you mean by be'etzem. I'm not sure what you mean. He said the words are Middos l'mayla hin atzmim. They are simply God has the capacity of many qualities, and he has the capacity of chesed, gvura, and teferes, and other middos.
Meaning they're
not due to the fact that there is a relationship with others. Simply Shleimus HaAtzmus. Shleimus HaAtzmus, he called it.
Shleimus HaAtzmus. In other words, they're kolol in the Atzmius of Hashem.
No. Atzmus of Hashem is higher than all attributes. Just make that clear. But the attributes, when you say Middos l'mayla, is because God chose to now emanate these attributes from himself. Not because something stimulated them or because he has a relationship with anyone. The question was, Ani Hashem lo shanisi. So how do you apply Middos, which is all about change? Well, we affect each other. Our pain arouses someone else's empathy or kindness and so on. That was the question that he asked in the previous page. And his answer is, it's not due to stimulation from others, it's due to the mere fact that God has qualities that he chose now to emanate. Those are the 10 spheres.
Right. So on the level of etzem, we're not saying that Hashem doesn't have the Middos. We're saying that it disappears in the light. It's that it's
No,
all
it doesn't
one.
say that either. No, on Atzmus, there's no Middos at all. This is already the level of the 10 hidden spheres that he's talking about. He's not talking about within Atzmus here.
So where he says be'etzem he's not referring to Atzmius?
No, it's talking about Hein Atzmi means they're not. Look, read. Hein Atzmi loishem Hispaalus min Atzilus. They're coming from his core, not because they're influenced by something else. God is emanating these spheres from within.
I see where it says מבחינת כוח ההגבלה שבאטמוס דאין סוף כשם שכוחו בבלי.
Yeah, but these are all faculties and capacities. Atzmus is always higher than all those levels.
Right, but what I'm trying to say is that in Atzmus, because these don't come out of nowhere, they're found originally in Atzmus.
But everything comes from the creation. Even a frog comes from Atzmus.
Yeah,
obviously.
Yeah. Okay, fine. So that having said that, now back a bunch of lines down. He says of Bechinas HaHergesh, I think it's in the parentheses.
That's an Atzilus, yeah.
בעניין Hispaalus היינו בחינס הרגש כמו שנדבר לאל, דכל עניין המידות באדם על דרך משל הוא עניין הרגש עצמו. So when here says a הרגש עצמו, I think maybe he
no,
means
absolutely
that,
not.
No?
Don't even go there. Hergesh Atzmus simply means that he feels it, that he senses it. This has nothing to do with Atzmus. No.
My Atzmus is Hashem Atzmus, and then when I feel something, it's like connecting to Hashem, no? No.
I don't even know I'm not sure what you meant by that. What does that mean? What are we talking about? Atzmus, we talk about Atzmus, it's beyond anything. I wouldn't define it with you don't even define it by Middos and anything. If that's what you're talking about, not sure where do you want to go here?
I'm trying to make a connection. I'm trying to make a connection to our Atzmus Chelik Elokim Ema to Hashem's Atzmus.
No, but he didn't mention Chelik Elokim Ema, and he's not talking about Atzmus and Neshama. He's not speaking about that. It's not the discussion here. So
Hergish Atzmo is just like he feels.
Yeah, that you sense it instead of not sensing it. In other words, on a higher level, it's not Hispaalus. There's no feeling. There's no tangible sensation. And here there is one.
Yeah, but who is Atzmo? Okay, that's for me to like continue to ponder, because I do see like a connection with the word etzem.
You see, but I don't see how it's anything to do with Atzmus and God. This is about human beings feel it. If you don't feel something, it's not Hergesh Atzmi. You feel it. You feel yourself. I feel an attraction to something. I feel repelled by something. That's called a Hergesh Atzmi.
Is our avoda? I think I understand. I can't be sure. That's why I'm a little murky. But from what I understand, our avoda now is to connect to Atzmus.
Yeah, but this is not the theme of. You're bringing other topics from other places, from Sichos and so on. We're learning Ayin Beis. Ayin Beis has the Rebbe Rashab has a very clear intention what he wants to explain here. What you're doing now is trying to fit it into things that you've learned elsewhere and want to make it's fine. But as you know, I'm not going to go there because that's your journey, not the journey of Ayin Beis.
Right, but I see Hasidus all as one direction. It's all heading towards Mashiach.
That's fine, but we're going back to the same thing. But being that I'm teaching it, I teach what it says in Ayin Beis. I'm not teaching other sichos, and I'm not teaching what people have learned elsewhere, unless it's directly relevant. You can apply it any way you like. I'm not telling you not to do it. But I can go there because I don't know. Everybody here has learned different sichos and different maimorim, and they can apply a lot of things, what we're learning here, to what they've learned. He's not discussing that right now. And in general, if you really want to be able to apply it properly, you want to understand what he says here. And then you can say, okay, what did I take away from this that can help me understand other things I've learned? That's what I've always emphasized. That's the best way to learn this properly.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, we'll stop here. We'll stop here, middle of page 1428.